Check. Testing. Mic check. Testing the stream. Mic check. Test. Mic 1.
Governor Chris Christie.
How are you? Thanks for coming. See ya. You coming? Thanks for coming. Hey there. How are you?
Hey, baby, I got my mama back.
Thank you for coming.
Chris.
Thank you. How you doing? Pleasure coming. See ya. Good evening. How are you? Good to see you.
Chris, Rick Miller.
Good to see you, Rick.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Hey, man.
Mr.
Thanks for coming.
President.
How are you? Hey, man. How are you? Thanks for coming.
All right. Good evening, good evening, good evening. You know, look, this is always a good moment for me when I come to a town hall and Mary Pat is with me and the hold room was in the pro shop. So it was pretty good. I could do Christmas shopping at the same time that I was getting ready to do a town hall. So thank you all. And let me start off by saying Merry Christmas to everybody. This is going to be our last town hall before Christmas. And so I think it's smart for all the candidates to leave you alone for a little while and let you enjoy your Christmas celebration. We're going to go back to New Jersey tomorrow and get ready. I have to start my shopping. And so that is going to be interesting. And we all want you to enjoy Christmas and have a great, great day. I do want to introduce her, even though you all know her. My wife, Mary Pat, is here with us tonight. So, you know, I don't have a canned stump speech. I don't have something that I memorized at the beginning of the campaign and that I use every time I start something like this. One, because I think it's disrespectful to all of you if I just say the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And two, to tell you the truth, I'd be pretty damn bored to be saying it over again. So I spend time in the car when I'm on my way to the town hall meeting thinking about, like, what do I really want to talk about tonight? And what's important for you to hear tonight from me? And what I thought on my way over here was that because we're getting ready to celebrate Christmas, because we're getting ready to celebrate, hopefully with family and friends and other loved ones on Monday, that we talk more tonight, at least I talk more tonight. You can ask whatever questions you like once we get to that point. But I talk to you tonight about what kind of country we want to be. You know, we can talk about all the individual problems and issues, and we'll get into those during the questions. And there are plenty of them to talk about, and plenty of work that needs to be done, and plenty of problems that need to be solved. But in the end, being president is much more than just a list of tasks on a to-do sheet that you either cross off for being accomplished or put question marks next to as to whether or not you can actually get it done or not. It's much more than that. And I think that we've made the presidency, over the course of the last 3 presidencies in particular, too small, really small. That somehow this is some like business person who walks into an office and has certain tasks to perform and either does them or doesn't, and then they're judged up or down based on that. In my view, that's never what the presidency has been about when we've been at our greatest. When we've been at our greatest, the presidency has been about having someone in that job who inspires us. Someone who we look at and we say, wow, we're really proud. Proud to have that person sitting there and representing our country around the world. We don't have a king or a queen. We have a president. And that person represents us not only here in this country and in every neighborhood, but all around the world. And we've made it much too small Barack Obama started making it small because, in my view, he made it about himself. He was the cause, not you. He was Mr. Hope and Change. The poster for his campaign was like an artist's depiction of him with the word hope under him, not under you. And he kind of acted that way, in my opinion, for 8 years. It was more about him than it was about us. And that's not where we should be. And say what you want about President Bush 43, agree with some of his decisions, disagree with others, but it never really was about him. And this changed when Obama came in. And then Donald Trump came. If there was ever someone who made the presidency all about him, it's Donald Trump. And he made us even smaller in another way because he divided us. He divided us and pitted us against each other. He identified for all of us who our enemies inside the country were. He calls everybody names. And I've been subject to that during this campaign as much or more than anybody. Probably me and Ron gotten the most names called over the course of the last 7 or 8 months. And all he really cares about is what he told me early in the presidency. I was in the White House and he said to me, Chris, this is the most luxurious place I've ever lived in my life. Do you know that I have somebody who shines my shoes every morning and somebody who steams my suits and ties every morning and helps me get dressed? This is the greatest place I've ever lived in my life. Now, of all the things that you could say to someone, and at that time, it was 2017, so I'd known him for 16 years. And I was the governor at the time. And for all the things you could tell someone about the presidency, what it's like to be president of the United States, for him, what it's like to be one of only 44 men in the 250 years of this country to have the honor to be president of the United States. He talks to me about shined shoes and steamed suits and who helps him get dressed in the morning. Meanwhile, this is a guy who claims to be a billionaire. So you would think, if he really is, he could afford to have somebody in his Trump Tower apartment or in his house at Mar-a-Lago or the place in Bedminster, New Jersey to shine his shoes and to steam his suit and help him get dressed in the morning. What really excited him about it, I think, was that we were paying for it, not him. And that was the best thing he could say about being president early on. Tells you everything you need to know. And for Joe Biden, this is like, the presidency is like a gold watch. It's his retirement gift for, 40 years of service in the United States Senate and 8 years of service as vice president. At the end, Joe Biden, who had lost for president 3 different times, finally ran up against the guy he could beat, the luckiest guy in the world. Just the way Donald Trump was the luckiest guy in the world 4 years before that, because he ran against the only person he could have possibly beaten, in Hillary Clinton. And karma's a bitch, as they say. And 4 years later, it turned around, Trump turned out to be the only candidate that Biden could have beaten. But when Joe Biden got there, that's the way he treated the job. Like a retirement gift. He looks tired. He looks old. He doesn't look up to it. Doesn't tell us the truth. Because if he told us the truth, he'd say, I'm old and tired. And what am I doing here? But see, his family is enjoying it too much. We can watch them do it, right? Jill Biden's at like every important football game there is. Traveling all over the country in Air Force One. We all know what Hunter's been up to. His daughter not paying her taxes. His brother, his sister, all making money off of having the last name of Biden. About them. It's not about us. This country is its greatest when it's about you. And that the person who's president sees themselves as a vehicle to help you be the best you can be, to help your family be the happiest it can be, to get the heck out of your way and let you run your lives the way you want to do the basic things we're supposed to do, take care of those who can't take care of themselves, protect you from crime, protect you from foreign invasion, and to set up the basics that allow our free enterprise system to work so that everybody who has a dream can help to make their lives the most they could possibly make it. And a president has to do those things when we're at our best, and then to find the ways to challenge you and challenge the country to be even better. You know, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, our first three, they stood up and said, it's not good enough to be a part of Great Britain. We want our own country. And the only way we'll truly be free and control our own lives is to be our own country. And if you took a poll, which everyone seems to be slaves to these days, if you took a poll, the Crown would have won big time. The American people were not ready to fight the biggest, strongest army in the world for their independence. But Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Franklin and Hamilton inspired us to be more, to be better, and they led us. And 3 of those 5 wound up being our first 3 presidents. And I don't think that's any coincidence. And in the middle of the next century, when this country was even more divided than it is today, and Abraham Lincoln could have just let the South go, he didn't. He said, no, this country needs to remain united, and I'm willing to fight to do it, and I need you to come with me. And to this day, we still lost more people in that war, more Americans in that war than any war we've ever fought. 600,000 Americans in a much, much, much smaller country gave their lives to keep this country together. And it was Lincoln who inspired us to do it. And in his second inaugural address, when he could have been taking the victory lap of the century, instead, he urged us to have charity to all and malice toward none. Imagine an American president today saying to the American people, have charity towards all and malice towards none. Can't imagine some of these characters saying that, can you? They want malice towards whoever they want you to have malice towards, so it gives them more power. Lincoln, at the height of the most powerful presidency this country has ever seen, didn't make himself more powerful. He urged us to our better angels. He said, put aside the bitterness and the anger and be better. We're better than that. That's a great president. When Franklin Roosevelt confronted the most horrible, ugly aggression the world had ever seen from Nazi Germany, he didn't tell us to fill the moat and pull up the drawbridge and let Europe worry about Europe. He said, we stand for freedom here, which means we stand for freedom everywhere. And he inspired us to go to Europe and to Asia and to fight that war for freedom. 500,000 Americans gave their lives in that war. But we came out of it bigger and stronger and richer and freer than we had ever been. And we set an example for the rest of the world that lasts barely, but still lasts to this moment. And that was 82 years ago that he said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Inspired us to do better. And not just with slogans, but with actions. That's a great president. John Kennedy told us to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Can you imagine one of these characters saying that today? Ask not what I can do for you, but what you can do for your country. They wouldn't dare. They'd be scared. It doesn't poll well. It doesn't poll well to ask you to sacrifice. It doesn't poll well to ask you to care about others. It doesn't poll well to do anything but say, get yours while you're watching me get mine. And he said, we're going to go to the moon by the end of this decade and return a man safely to Earth. And I can tell you, because I've read all the history on it, he had no godly idea how he was going to do it. Not one. But what he had confidence in was us. He knew he wasn't going to accomplish it. In fact, he didn't even live for another 18 months after he said it. But he knew that we could do it if he set the goal for us and inspired us to do it. He had confidence in us. That's a great president. And Ronald Reagan, in a time when our country had double-digit inflation and double-digit interest rates and double-digit unemployment, when we had lines to get gasoline and odd even days to get gas based on our license plates, when we had the Soviets in Afghanistan and our hostages in Iran, and I was a brand new voter, getting ready to turn 18 years old. And I was hopeless. I was a freshman in college. Nobody I knew could get a job. My father had lost his. And the world was led by a president who told us it was our fault, that we had a malaise about us. Not his fault, our fault. And Ronald Reagan got elected president, and he said, government isn't the solution to the problem. Government is the problem. He took responsibility for the problems. He didn't lay it on us. And then he told us that the Soviet Union was the evil empire and that we were not going to let their aggression stand. And imagine this, 10 years later, the Soviet Union no longer existed because he led us to believe that we should sacrifice to fight them. And he beat them without ever raising a gun or firing a shot or asking for one American to give their life. Just sacrifice some of our money and he would get it done. And as he left office, he told us that America would always be a shining city on the hill, a place that others wanted to come to because of everything we could achieve together. That's a great president. Not the garbage we have to choose from right now. Who stand up on a podium in this state just last weekend and say that immigrants from South America and Asia and Africa poisoned the blood of our country. And we have a large number of people in our party who say, that's who I want for president. That's how I want to be represented around the world. Someone who stands up and says that when I'm charged with crimes, I'm doing it for you. What exactly is that doing for you? a billionaire from New York who stands up and says, "Woe is me. Everybody's picking on me." That's a leader? That's a coward. A coward who your mother would teach you from the time you were a child. A coward is someone who won't take responsibility for their own conduct, who's always looking to point the finger at somebody else and lay the blame somewhere else. It's never my fault. Their hand gets caught in the cookie jar and it wasn't there. The window is broken with the baseball on the inside and he's got his glove in his hand and he said, "Wasn't me. I didn't break the window." That's who the front runner is in the Republican primary, according to these polls, for president of the United States. We should be ashamed. As a party, we should be ashamed that we're even considering him for this job. We deserve better. But we're not going to get it if we don't do it for ourselves. We can't stand by anymore and say this will fix itself. And I got into this race for president because everybody in my party who was offering themselves to be president of the United States were acting like it was going to fix itself. Don't mention his name. Don't criticize him. Don't incur his wrath. Don't do anything that's risky. Play it safe and hope that you fix the problem for us. That's not what leadership is supposed to be, everybody. We're supposed to fix the problems for you. That's what you hire us for. Leadership is about looking at you and saying, "This is the problem. I know it. Follow me. We'll fix it together." Instead, he wants you to return him to the most luxurious place he's ever lived in his life, so he can get his shoes shined and his suit steamed and someone help him to get dressed in the morning. I'm sorry. I can't stand by and silently acquiesce to that when I know the history of this country and what we can be and what we should demand and what we're entitled to as Americans for how hard we work every day and how much we believe in the underlying principles of this country. We will never love this country fully again until we love each other again. Until we have love in our hearts for every American, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, whether they're an independent, whether they're black or white or brown, whether they're rich or poor. If we don't do that, we will never be able to truly love this country, because no leader who says they love America can truly love them if they tell you to hate other Americans. If they tell you they're going to kick people out of this country who they call fascists, who say they're going to use the power of the office of the presidency to punish their enemies. He's telling you all this before he does it. The audacity is extraordinary. And we sit by, and I tell you, I run into voters in this state and other places all the time who say, well, you know, he got screwed in the last election, and so we owe it to him to give him back again. Well, he lied about that, but he's telling the truth now. He wants to be back there because he wants to be on a vengeance tour. He said, I will be your retribution. The theme of his campaign in 2016 is, I am your voice. 8 years later, he says, I am your retribution. I know he's a liar. But knowing him as well as I do now for 22 years, let me give you a hint. He's telling the truth this time. This is his last show. It's the last episode of The Apprentice. Except he's the apprentice. And we're hiring him for the most important job in the world while the world is on fire. While there's wars in Europe and in the Middle East and an aggressor in China and invasions at the border from Mexico. While all this is going on, we're hiring a guy who's telling us that he's in it only for himself. And what you can do to help make his life better. Well, you know, Ron DeSantis won't say anything about it. And Nikki Haley hasn't said anything about it. And Vivek Ramaswamy endorses it and just says, hey, bud, clear the way, because I'm only 38, so when you go, I'd like to try this next. It sounds pretty cool to me. And I am proud to be the lone voice saying it. I am proud to stand up here in front of all of you tonight as I've stood in front of crowds all over the state and will continue to, saying the truth. And I don't care that it makes some people angry. I don't understand why they're so scared of the truth. How do I tie this to Christmas? You're saying to yourself. He started this saying he was inspired by Christmas.
Give this country the best present.
Well, here's what it is. That's not bad, but it's not what I'm saying. I'm doing a house party tomorrow morning. I'll use yours tomorrow morning. What the Bible teaches us is that the strength of Jesus Christ was because he was the truth. It says it in the Bible. I am the truth. I am the way. For those of us who believe in that, that's why Christmas reminded me to say those things. Because what we remember, and what I hope we all remember next Monday, is that we celebrate his birth because he was the truth. He was the way. And as my Jewish friends say to me, look, we got no problem with Jesus. We think he was a really good guy. We just don't think he was the guy. That's what you guys think. Nobody in this country would have an objection to saying that he was a man who stood for truth and died for us, for the truth. That's what he sacrificed. And that story starts again on Monday with his birth and continues until the spring when we commemorate his passing. What are we going to be willing to sacrifice between Monday and the spring for our country? There's nothing more I can do than this. This is what I know how to do. This is what I was sent here to do. And I believe it's my mission. And so I'm going to do it. But I can't do it without you. It can't happen without you. The dark forces who have turned this country small and angry want to keep in control. Greatest thing about the country that Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Franklin and Hamilton gave us was they said, we decide. Not a king, not King George III, and not King Donald I. We decide. And so that's what this race is really all about. Yeah, we've got economic issues, and yeah, we have an immigration problem, and yes, we have wars around the world, and yes, we have a drug addiction problem in this country, and yes, we have an education problem in this country. All of those things are true. But if we blow who we put in charge of it, none of the rest of it's going to get fixed anyway. Character. Character. Character is what matters the most. And we've got a big decision to make. You got a big one to make in 4 weeks. And you all have no excuses. You know, if you live in New Jersey and your primary is not till June 5th, well, you know it's pretty much going to be over by then. Nothing's over now. You're the first. You've been given that privilege and that responsibility by the people of this country. And on January 23rd, we're going to see what you're going to do with it. But if he's back and he wins here on January 23rd, New Hampshire will have no one to blame but themselves. You'll be the ones who sent him off on the limo ride back to the most luxurious place he's ever lived in his life. Because the only thing standing between, at that point, standing between him and the White House will be 82-year-old Joe Biden. That is a very, very thin barricade, everybody. Very thin. So I'm challenging you as we leave here to take a few days away from the politics of the first in the nation primary, to think over the Christmas weekend what in your heart you want for this country, what in your heart you want for your family, what in your heart you want for our future, and then decide. I want your vote, of course I do. Wouldn't be here if I didn't. But what matters much more to me is that you search yourself to find out what you believe is the right thing to do for the country and then act on it. If you do that, that's all I can ever ask of you. And the rest of it is going to be up to the person you pick and what kind of person they are and what kind of leader they'll be or not. And so feel empowered by your position and feel enlightened and lifted up by this holiday. It is about birth and about a new beginning. And we need a new beginning for this country, built on the foundation of our past, but a new beginning for our country. I'm running to try to give you that new beginning. And I'll give you every ounce of energy I have to try to do it. But we got to do it together. So we are now going to go to questions from all of you. And your questions, as always in my town halls, can be about whatever the heck you want. And different than other town halls that you maybe have been to, my staff does not pick who is going to ask. We don't pre-screen our questions. For most of the people in this room, I don't even know who you are, what you really think, and what you might ask me. But guess what? That's what happens when you're president, too. You have no idea what's going to come across that desk every day. And you better be ready to answer directly to the American people who hired you and do the job. So this is good training for that. And you people are really experienced at it. So I'm ready to answer your questions. Raise your hand. We got people with microphones, and we will go. So who wants to start? I'll give you mine.
Governor Christie, in the spirit of the season, and because you just mentioned the word character 3 times in a row, and obviously you believe very deeply in that, I'm asking your permission to relate a little quick anecdote about your character, which I personally know. I happen to have been present at another primary campaign when an elderly gentleman in the back row keeled over unconscious to clamor from everybody in the audience. I and another physician ran over to his assistance. And under those circumstances, you probably all know, the conventional wisdom is for the campaign staff and security to whisk the candidate out of the room because it's a disturbance or untoward event. But to my amazement, as I sat ministering to this gentleman, Christie came up and kneeled on the floor next to this gentleman, held his shoulder and his arm, and said over and over, consoling, kind, hopeful things. Said, we have EMTs en route, you'll be just fine. And he stayed there on his knees until the ambulance people arrived and took him to the hospital. The kind of compassion that I saw from Governor Christie that day is something you simply cannot fake. I have 40 some years of experience as a physician. I know how people react under those stressful moments. He exhibited a kindness, a humanity, and a compassion that I would want to see in the White House. So if you're looking to have your very best friend or family member, the person that you would hope would have your back, Christie is the person to do that. Merry Christmas, Governor.
I remember that, and I was really glad you were there. Because all I was trained to do was get on my knees and say really nice things to him. If he were counting on me to try to save his life, it would have been a really ugly ending. But I was glad you were there too. And look, like in the end, the only thing that I want to say in response to that is that's what we're supposed to do. And that was the reference I was making to opening your hearts and loving every American. That's what we're supposed to do for each other. We're not supposed to be doing things to each other. We're supposed to be doing things for each other because we share a common goal and a common purpose and a common belief in the goodness of this country and the goodness of other human beings. And so, yeah, I remember that, but I'm really glad you were there. Would have been a tragic result if you were not.
Can I just say one
Yeah,
more thing?
sure.
To my amazement, a month or so later, when I ran into Governor Christie, I learned that he had been keeping up with this gentleman and knew exactly how he was doing. He had a personal relationship with him by telephone. And again, it shows the kind of character that he has.
So be forewarned, if you give me your cell phone number, I will call. That's definitely one of the lessons you could take from that. Thank you very much for that. It's very generous and I appreciate it. Question, another question from somebody. Oh, yes, sir, right here. Here, you know what, he'll give you his microphone right behind there. There you go.
Chris, I have a comment and a question. The comment is, remember during the last election when Donald Trump was going to debate Joe Biden? And I heard on Fox News that Chris Christie was going to coach Donald Trump. And I said to my wife, I said, hey, Chris is going to polish him up. I said, this is going to be great. Well, as everybody knows, that when we got into it, shortly into the debate, Donald Trump, not only did he go off message, he went off track. And then Biden, I thought, there it is. Biden got the advantage and he wasn't anything to write home about. My question to you, Chris, is what the hell happened in that teaching session?
Well, let me tell you, Glad you brought that up. I coached him not only in 2020, but in 2016. And he asked me to come in and coach him after he lost the first debate to Hillary Clinton. And I actually got him to admit that he lost the first debate to Hillary Clinton. I went in and coached him. And in 2016, he was a, relatively speaking, coachable person. He was willing to listen. And he knew I was better at this than he was. And so he followed my advice, and he won those last two debates against Hillary. And I think that played a role in him winning the election. In 2020, he was significantly less coachable. And I'll tell you two quick stories from debate prep in 2020, which will, shine a light on that. The first one is we were in the map room of the White House preparing him for the debate, and we were talking about COVID. Obviously, we were in the midst of some of the worst of COVID in late September of 2020. And he was talking about COVID, and his answer basically was, I did it perfectly. I handled it perfectly. Couldn't have done anything differently. And Kellyanne Conway, who was prepping him with me, was playing the moderator. I was playing Joe Biden. And she said, I had to take a couple of sedatives, but I was able to pull it off. She said to him, she has a way of saying things to him where he listens a little bit better. And she said to him, Mr. President, this saying you handled COVID perfectly, I don't think voters will hear that well. So it was typical Kellyanne. She wasn't telling him, idiot, don't say that, but she was saying that we wouldn't hear that well. So he said, well, how should I say it? And she said, I think the way you should say it is that you came to the Oval Office every day to do the very best you could to save as many lives as you could. So he looked at me and he said, what do you think of that? And I said, that's much better. He goes, okay, let's try it again. So Kellyanne asked the question about COVID. He starts talking about Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine. The vaccine will be here and that's going to help people. And then he kind of gets halfway up out of his chair. And we're sitting at a conference table across from each other. And he leans across the conference table and looks at me and he says, and I handled it perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. And better than you ever could, because you've never run a damn thing in your life. To me, as Joe Biden. And so then Kellyanne Conway said, Vice President Biden. And my answer was, I said, well, first off, I want to talk to the people out there watching tonight who've lost loved ones to COVID. As you may know, I've lost 3 dear members of my family in my life. I lost my first wife. I lost our young daughter in the same car accident. And I recently lost my son, Bo, to cancer. And I know that the hole that leaves in your heart can never be filled. And so tonight, I'm not telling you I can make it better. I just want you to know I know how you feel. And then I looked at him and I said, Mr. President, to respond to your statement, could you do me a favor? Could you just show me your hands? And Trump looked at me like I was nuts, right? He said, what are you talking about? I said, just please, show me your hands. So he held his hands up like that. And I said, you can put them down now. And I said, I don't know what you all saw, but I'll tell you what I saw. I saw the blood of 400,000 dead Americans all over those hands. And if you call that perfect, then you and I have a much different view of what perfect is for President of the United States in a crisis. And Trump just turned beet red, as you might imagine. And Hope Hicks was there as well. And he turned to Hope and he said, hey, Hope, how lucky are we we're not debating Chris, huh? He goes, Biden will never come up with something like that in a million years. This Chris is a killer. He's a killer. At the end of the last session we had before the debate, on the day of the debate you referenced, where he did go completely off the rails, I was leaving because remember, there was no public transportation. So I had to drive to Washington from New Jersey, and then I was driving back up to New York because I was doing commentary on the debate on ABC that night. And so I'm going to get in my car, and his secretary comes running out and says, Governor, I'm sorry, the president says he needs to see you one more time. So he just literally took my bag and threw it in the trunk and went back up to the Oval Office. And we were there by ourselves, which was highly unusual in the Trump White House. The Oval Office was like, Union Station in Washington on a Friday. I mean, it was just people in and out all the time. It was nutty. but just by ourselves. And he said, close the door. So I closed the door. It was just the two of us. And he looked at me and he said, you're the best debater in the country. There's nobody better than you. My mind is cluttered. Tell me one thing I should do tonight to make sure I win. It's okay. One thing? He said, yeah. I said, all right. Let Biden talk. Because if you let Biden talk, he will hang himself. You don't have to win this. Let him lose it. And he looked at me and he went like this. And then he walked out the door to the colonnade and went upstairs to PAC and get ready to head to Cleveland. And then he interrupted Joe Biden 89 times. 89 times. I did my very best. But when someone refuses to be coached, when someone is so arrogant that they believe that their grievances are more important than you, that's what happens. And so I watched the debate. And when I got up to ABC that night, I was in the makeup chair next to George Stephanopoulos. And he turned to me and he said, so what's the debate going to be like tonight? And I said, I think he's in really good headspace. I talked to him right before he left. I told him that he should let Biden talk and that Biden would hang himself. And he gave me thumbs up and smile and he walked out. And George said, that's good advice. I said, yeah, I think, George, if he does that, Biden's gonna have a problem. I go, you bet. We were like 10 minutes into the debate. And just so you know, like when you're on TV doing the commentary, like you stay right where you are. So like they come to you first before the debate starts. You all get to say something really briefly. And then the debate starts. And you don't go to some other room. You're sitting on the set and you watch the debate the entire time on the set. And then they come right back to you when it's over. So we're sitting there and I'm sitting next to George and we're 10 minutes into the debate. And he turns to me and he goes, hey, Governor, great job. So George Stephanopoulos had exactly the same feeling you did. And believe me, his refusal to debate this time is for one reason and one reason only. And it's what he said to Hope Hicks. Thank God we don't have to debate Chris. He went through 30 debate sessions with me over the two elections. He knew what he was in for. And he ain't coming on that stage. I guarantee you, though, if there comes a day when I'm not in this race, he'll show up then. He's not afraid of anybody else. And the problem for us as a party, if he turned out to be our nominee, is because he hasn't showed up for the debates, Biden won't either. Joe Biden, I'm going to predict this to you, if Trump were ever the nominee, and I'm working as hard as I can to make sure he won't be. But if he were, Biden's going to say, well, Trump didn't respect the debates in the primary. Why the hell should I come and debate him in the general?
Don't you think the American people are going to demand that, though?
Well, the American people can demand all they want, but I think Joe Biden's going to say, and the other thing he's going to say is, I'm not going to debate a criminal. This guy tried to interfere with the election. He tried to overturn the election illegally. He's under 4 different indictments, and I'm not going to get on the stage with him. And Trump, by not debating, gave him the excuse to not debate himself. And that is going to be the worst thing for somebody like Trump who wants to win the election, is to not get Biden on the stage. Because the comparison would be difficult for Biden to be up there, standing up there for 2 hours, and having to debate without a teleprompter or note cards or any of that stuff. So, you can sometimes be too cute by half with this stuff. And I think Trump has been. By trying to avoid me, he's probably going to cost himself, if he is the nominee, any chance of debating Joe Biden in the fall. And that's going to hurt his chances, not help them. And by the way, as you imply, it's bad for the country for us not to have the opportunity to see both of these characters up there. Now, there may be just so much of that you could take if it were those two. But nonetheless, that's the way it would go. Well, sure, why not?
So with this long history of a relationship with Donald Trump and coaching him in 2016 and 2020 and trying to help him as much as he can, what was the turning point? What was the epiphany for you where you can stand up here tonight and talk about the reality of the selfish man that he really is? When did that happen for you? Because the American public elected him as president while you were helping him, and you helped him get there.
I did, because I thought he'd be better than Hillary Clinton. And I thought that I could help make him a better candidate and a better president. And I turned out to be wrong. And I've said that from the beginning in this race. I made a judgment that was wrong. And the epiphany was election night 2020 at 2:30 in the morning, when he came out in the White House and said the election's been stolen. When I knew he had no way of knowing whether the election was stolen or not, all the votes hadn't even been counted yet in most of the states. He was doing it because he was setting it up to try to steal it. And when I sat there and listened to that, I was sitting next to George again, and I turned to him and I said, "Come to me right out of the speech." And he said, "Why?" I said, "I won't disappoint you." And I broke from him right at that moment.
But I think there were so many signs during his presidency.
There were.
That an intelligent man and a man of character would have understood how selfish this man is.
I did. Look, I wasn't ready to give up on trying to make it better. He was the president. And so there, for me, I had access to him. He would at times listen to me. And so I wasn't ready to give up on trying to make him better. And what was the alternative? I was looking at 78-year-old Joe Biden, who couldn't put two sentences together. We had a series of bad choices, really bad choices. But in the end, the fact that I didn't like his tweeting, or I didn't think he was fair about one thing or another, is much different than undercutting our democracy. To me, much different. The other things are policy arguments and personality problems that troubled me, and I talked about that publicly at the time. I mean, look, during those years, I was one of his bigger Republican critics every week on TV, because he used to call me when I'd get off TV on Sundays. "The hell are you talking about? Thought you were my friend." I said, "I am your friend. You should listen to me." So look, I don't want to get in a debate back and forth about it. What I want to tell you is, one, I made a mistake. I was wrong. But I was motivated by the fact that I thought Hillary Clinton would be an awful president. And I thought, all right, maybe we can make this guy better. I think my emotion was what a lot of the American people who voted for him thought. They weren't sold on him completely, but they went, him, her, let's give him a try. How bad could it be? Well, we found out. My concern now is that I think I'm the most credible messenger to bring this, because I was there. I witnessed it up close. If I'm saying it, people should take it seriously, because I saw it. It's not like I'm observing from 1,000 miles away. I'm seeing it and watching it. And in the process, I'm admitting the mistakes I made too. If you're looking for the perfect candidate, you're not going to find them. They're not here. He comes on Monday, as we were discussing. The only perfect one I've ever known. And the fact is that, but no one else that I've seen in our political process right now is admitting, or very few are admitting, that they were mistaken about him and that he should be stopped. It's a short list. It's a short list. Questions?
Governor, Merry Christmas to you and your wife. As growing up in New Hampshire, I've been seeing presidents and presidential candidates come through our towns since, I think, the Ford administration. But you, sir, are the first candidate that ever looked me right in the eye and said, "I'm going to shine my own shoes." I applaud you for that. My question is, as a young man watching candidates come through, I can remember the days when we were proud of Ronald Reagan, but we were also proud of Tip O'Neill. And, I'm sure there's other examples of that along the way, but those examples don't exist anymore. And you brought that up where you said it's time for America to be proud of their president again. And I think that if you're elected, that we can ensure that America will be proud of their president. But as the de facto leader of the Republican Party, what can you do as the leader of this party to make us proud of senators in your party, members of the House of Representatives in your party, and maybe even be an example for the Democratic Party as well?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think that the last part of it's even more important than the first part. Like, look, I was governor of New Jersey for 8 years, and for all 8 years, I had a Democratic legislature. And it wasn't even close. It was like 25-15 in the Senate. It was 48-32 in the lower house. Like, it wasn't like a vote here or there, and I'm there. It was big margins. And so what I had to decide early on was, what kind of governor was I going to be? Was I going to just be a headline maker who threw bombs, stood in the corner, held my breath, and went, oh, they're not doing it, it's all their fault? Or was I going to come to the center of the room and extend my hand and say, all right, I know we don't agree on everything, but let's try to get some things done. And the best example I can give you of that is the beginning, even before my term started, during the transition in 2009, I decided to go down and see the new Senate president. Now, the new Senate president was a guy named Steve Sweeney. He is president of the iron workers in New Jersey. So another shy and retiring guy like me. So he's in South Jersey near Philly. I'm in North Jersey up near New York. So I said to the troopers, because you get them from the time you get elected, I said to them, look, I want to go down to the Senate president's office. So, well, we looked at the schedule, sir, you don't have an appointment. And I'm like, yeah, I think you'll see me if I show up. And they said, okay. So I went down there and walked into his office. His secretary was completely alarmed. And she's like, you don't have an appointment. And I said, well, is he here? I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes with him. So, well, let me go see. So she knew he was there. He went back, and then I found out what the problem was. Steve had just come from the gym. He didn't have any appointments today. He was in sweatpants and a T-shirt and sneakers. Comes out, he's like, Governor-elect, I didn't know you were coming. What are you doing here? And I said, I was in the neighborhood. I decided to stop by. And he looked at me and said, bullshit. He said, your neighborhood's 2 hours away. And I said, I thought you and I needed to talk, and I wanted to do it now. Let's go in your conference room. And I went in, and I said to him, look, we can yell and scream and argue with each other for the next 8 years. And he said 4 years, and I said 8 years. And I said, or we can resolve with each other that we're going to be honest with each other, direct with each other, and that our goal is going to be to put touchdowns in the end zone. I said, I'm willing to work with you to put touchdowns in the end zone. If you're willing to work with me, keep your word and tell the truth. What do you want to do? And it was the most important 10 seconds of my entire governorship when he sat there and thought about that. And he stood up and he put that big, meaty iron worker's hand out and he said, let's put touchdowns in the end zone. And we shook hands, and for the next 8 years, we did. Not everything I wanted, and certainly not everything he wanted, but we found ways to compromise on really hard issues. Pension reform, health care reform, tax reform, eliminated the estate tax, fired the entire Camden City Police Department because they were so awful. We did it together so that nobody could argue about it. Republicans and Democrats did it together because we were sick of having Camden be the murder capital of America. Right? All difficult, controversial things. And whenever one or the other of us would get off track, and we would, that was our code phrase. He'd be sitting in my office, and if I was the one getting off track and saying, no, I'm not doing this, forget it, I'm not doing it, he said, touchdowns in the end zone? Or I would say it to him. The only way that happens is through that personal relationship. And that's what Reagan did with O'Neill. They didn't agree on much of anything. But they agreed that the country was more important than them and that they were going to try to get things done. So Tip O'Neill opposes Reagan's tax cut, but Reagan passes it, and O'Neill doesn't refuse to post it, which is what people would do these days. No, I'm not putting it up. O'Neill said, you can get the votes, I'm putting it up. They reformed Social Security together. They reformed immigration together. Sound familiar? Sound like things we need to do right now? And so my view is that what's much more important than me worrying about my own party is to be the kind of president who is welcoming to the other party and showing them that if they negotiate with me in good faith, I'm not afraid to make a deal. Compromise is not a dirty word. And when you set that example, your party's got a choice, follow or not. And when you're the president of the United States, you got a pretty good bully pulpit and a pretty good home field advantage. You bring him into the Oval Office, take him on Marine One, take him on Air Force One, take him out to Camp David. You screw that up, you're bad at this business. You're not good with all those advantages. And that's the way I'd go about it. I've had the experience to do it, and that's the way I would do it. And sometimes it would make members of my party angry. And sometimes, like with Sweeney, I remember going down the bottom of my driveway one morning, on a Sunday morning, I picked up the largest newspaper in the state, took it out of the bag, opened it up, and the headline said, Sweeney, I want to punch Christie in the head. That was not one of our shining moments. We had fights and arguments. You're going to have that. But at the end of it then, like 3 days later, I called him after he cooled off and said, all right, what did I do to tick you off so badly? And let's get together and have a drink and figure it out. And that's what we did. And sometimes I had to apologize to him. And sometimes he had to apologize to me for saying on the record he wanted to punch me in the head. Because he had big hands. It would have hurt. So I think that's what we need to do again in the country. And I'm coming out with a new book on Reagan in the beginning of February that I've been working on for the last year. And the title of the book is What Would Reagan Do? And it goes through his entire life, chapter by chapter, and pulls from that section of his life a lesson that helped him become a better president. And I know what Reagan would do right now. He would bring the country together. He would say, enough of the arguing and the bickering and the anger. We're the luckiest people in the world. We're Americans. And we need to do this. And he'd inspire us to do it. And so this leadership comes from all different kinds of people. I mean, he was just an okay actor who had a lot more capacity inside of him than people knew. And he led us. And so sometimes you take chances on people and it pays off, and sometimes you take chances and it doesn't. But with him it did, and I would follow that blueprint that I started in New Jersey, but that he taught me when I watched him from 1981 to 1989 with he and Tip O'Neill. Yeah. Right here.
Hello again. So I just wanted to ask, because you brought this up earlier about like how Trump and Biden see the office as like kind of like their gold watch. I'm curious like what you could do as president to like remove the idea that you can grift from public office and to earn money when you're the president, but also like the stuff that happens in Congress, because I think public office is a public service. It's not a career, and it's not there to you're not there to enrich yourself, but to serve the people. So I'm just curious to hear what you think about that and what can be done.
Yeah, look, there's both practical things that can and should be done and symbolic things that can and should be done. So first of all, in Congress, you should not be allowed to be trading stocks while you're in Congress. Like, that's pretty simple, right? You're getting confidential, privileged information every day that will, when they become public, will move markets. And we have members of Congress over and over and over again who all of a sudden, just coincidentally, decide to start selling certain things that they got bad information on and buying certain things that they got good information on. I mean, it's one of the oldest grifts in the world, right? We should stop. Every member of Congress should have to put every asset they have in a blind trust. When I was governor of New Jersey, and my wife worked on Wall Street, so this was a particular concern of people. And what we did was we took every asset we had, we put it in a blind trust, and it was all of our money, except for what I was getting paid, and she was getting paid on a week-to-week basis, right? So we had 2 kids going through college at that time when I was governor, one who went to Princeton and one who went to Notre Dame. So picture what that cost, right? And so what I would have to do is call the trustee and say, okay, I need $30,000 for this semester at Princeton, and I need $30,000 for this semester at Notre Dame. And they would send the money. But we were not given any information during those 8 years about how our investments were going, how much money we really had left. So I remember calling the trustee 4 days after I left office, and I said, okay, so where are we? And he said, we'll go over the specifics later, but my message to you is get to work. Right? I think that's the way every member of Congress should be. Absolutely blind trust. Not only not knowing what it's invested in, not knowing how much you have or don't have. And there was a trigger there. If I got below a certain amount, he would tell me, like, I remember saying to him one time, can I pay this now? And he said, yeah. And if you can't, I'll tell you. Thank you very much. So I think that should be for members of Congress. And by the way, Trump brought it to a whole new level as president, right? Because he said he turned over the business to his sons, and yet they were continuing to do things that he was benefiting from personally because he was still taking money from there. You should be able to be paid by one person when you're president, the American taxpayer. It's a $400,000 a year salary. You should be able to get by. And you shouldn't be making money from other places. You shouldn't know about that. And all you should be able to do is draw from a blind trust account at the request, the same way I did it as governor. Call the trustee, ask for the money, and spend it. It's still your money, but you should know what's going on. And so I think that would solve a lot of the problems, because that's the way they make the money. There should also be really strict rules on outside income. Now, there are for the president until Trump, but for members of Congress too. There should be strict limits on outside income. There were when I was governor. I mean, I couldn't even write a book when I was governor. I mean, we had real strict rules in New Jersey, and I think they were fine. Like, I couldn't write a book. I didn't know that was the rule. Someone wanted me after Hurricane Sandy to write a book. And so I went to my counsel and said, okay, publisher's coming. They want me to write a book. How do we handle that? And the poor guy, who was my deputy chief counsel, had to come into me like 4 hours later and say, you can't. I said, what do you mean I can't? Well, you can't write a book because you can't get paid for it. If you want to write a book for free, you can. And I'm like, yeah, I think I'll hold off on that. And so we can have rules like that and should have rules like that on outside income. A president should be influenced by only what he believes is the right thing to do for the country, and not by what financially is going to help him. I would extend the same thing to his family members, because what we've seen both in the Trump administration, I mean, think about this. In 1 year, when they were working in the White House, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump made $34 million while they were working in the White House, because they said, well, we can do that because we take no salary for working in the White House. Right? We've seen what Hunter Biden's doing. How about Hunter Biden sending all these paintings? Have you seen the Hunter Biden paintings? Would you buy any of them? I mean, but it turns out that major Democratic donors buy them. I mean, come on. We know what's going on here. So it should extend to members of the family. And what I've said is, if I'm president, nobody in my family can be involved in trying to represent anybody in front of government. Sorry. Not going to make money that way. I work to get here, not you. And you're not making money off of it. Find some other way to make money. I've got a brother and a sister and a 90-year-old father. I don't think I'm going to have to worry about him, but he's probably watching on live stream tonight. You're not allowed either, Dad. And, that'll be it. And I think that's the way we have to do it, because it is, especially the last two presidents, it's reprehensible. And it makes the American people feel like they're being taken. Yet, we're actively considering sending one of them back. Breathtaking. Yes, sir, in the back. And folks back there are allowed to ask questions too. Just because you're in the cheaper seats, it doesn't mean that you don't get to ask questions. So I'll keep an eye on you too. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. And thank you. There's a reason why I shook your hand tonight, because I started getting close to you during the Hurricane Sandy down in your wonderful place. What got me attracted to you and how you spoke and how you dealt with your constituents down there at such a devastating time was when you walked side by side with President Obama. I'd just like to know what you talked about. And I know it was monumental, but it shows your character. And this gentleman over here talked about your character. And that's what attracted me to you long ago. I said, there's something about this guy. And so now today I ask you that. What did you talk about, and how did you resolve taking care of your constituents that never happened to you before in your life?
Well, I mean, remember what Hurricane Sandy was like. It's 11 years ago now. but we lost 346,000 homes in 24 hours. We had no operational water treatment or wastewater treatment plants anywhere in the state. Every major state highway was obstructed with debris. We had 2/3 of the citizens of the state, over 6 million people, with no power for 2 weeks. Every school was closed. It was a monumental disaster. Our nuclear power plant didn't have the energy to keep it cool, so we had to be pumping bay water into the core to make sure it didn't melt down. I mean, every day there was something that was crazy. And so my view was we have one president at a time. I didn't vote for Barack Obama in 2008. I voted for John McCain. So as this was happening, the first night, my staff, as we got to the end of the first night, and we were exhausted, the president had called me already to ask me how things were going and asked me what I needed. And I told him I needed him to do the emergency declaration to free up the FEMA money. He said, fine, I'll sign it right now. And he said, and here's a number. And if you need anything, this is my personal number. Call me anytime, night or day. And I thought he might actually mean it. So I took it. And that night, my staff said to me, he's going to ask. And now remember, just in case you forget, Hurricane Sandy hit 8 days before the presidential election. 8 days before Obama and Romney. I was keynote speaker for Romney in the 2012 Republican convention and was his number one surrogate on the road and had raised more money for Mitt Romney than any elected official in the country. So it wasn't like I was playing a minor role trying to defeat this guy, all right? So my staff said to me, he's going to call and he's going to want to come. What do you want to do? And I looked at them like they were nuts. I go, what do you mean? If the president wants to come, he comes. And I welcome him. And that's the way it's going to work. And I don't want any of you, we got enough problems on our hands. How about you leave the politics to me? I'm better at it than all of you. So you go keep doing the job we need to do, and I'll handle the politics. And the next morning, Tuesday morning, 1 week before the election, my phone rang. They said it was the White House. Can you hold for the president? Yes. It was Obama. He said to me, how are things going? I gave him the update for the morning, and he said, Chris, I'd like to come tomorrow and see this for myself. But if you don't want me to come, I understand that. And I said, Mr. President, of course I want you to see this, and I want the people of our state to see you caring about them. So if that's the attitude you're coming with, you're welcome to come. And he said, that's the attitude I'm coming with. I said, great. You tell me where to meet you, I'll meet you. And Air Force One landed at Atlantic City Airport. And that's when we had the infamous hug, right, that people talk about between me and Obama. Let me tell you, I'm from New Jersey. I know how to hug. We hug all the time. That was no hug. We shook hands. Here, why don't you stand up for a second? I'm going to show you how this worked. So, you're me, I'm Obama, okay? He gets off the plane, I shake his hand, he goes like this. Don't even go any closer. That was it. That was the hug, right? You must not be from New Jersey. So, and then we traveled around. So you want to know, what do we talk about? We got into the car, into that big limousine, and he wanted to be briefed on power and all the things that I talked about. What's going on? What are we doing? What more can we do? What do you need? And I went through that list of them. So the initial ride in the limousine was very business oriented, and we went to a neighborhood in Brigantine, New Jersey, which had just been destroyed. In fact, we went to a neighborhood that was across from a marina. Now I want you to picture this. The houses are right across from the marina. There were boats stacked 3 and 4 high on each other in between the houses. So now Obama, who's from Illinois, right? We're walking down the street and he sees these boats and he says, why do they keep the boats that way? Mr. President, the boats were in the marina. The tidal surge drove them across the street. And as one and another, the tide kept getting higher, it was stacking on top of the other ones. And his mouth was wide open. He was like, that's not possible. I'm like, take a look, it's possible. And we went from home to home and we met with people who couldn't live in those homes right now because they were completely flooded. And we just talked to them. And he asked them, how are you doing? What do you need? What can we do? How can we help the governor? And then we had a press availability and we answered questions from the press. And then the part you'll find most interesting is at that press conference, they asked me, how's the president doing? And I said, look, I have to compliment the president because everything I've asked for, he's given me. And he's been available anytime, day or night that I've called. And he promised me he would do that. And he's been true to his word. And on behalf of the people of New Jersey, I want to thank him. So we then got into Marine One because he wanted to take the helicopter up the coast to see the destruction along the entire seacoast. So we got in Marine One, and Marine One is really pretty small. And when you're sitting across from the president, you're like as close as this, sitting down from each other, like your knees are nearly touching. So he looks at me and he says, by the way, those really nice things that you said in the press conference, those were really, really wonderful. And I know you're in a difficult political situation here, and I appreciate your willingness to say it. And I said, look, Mr. President, I said, I only told the truth. If you had done a lousy job, I would have said you were doing a lousy job. But you're not. You've given us everything that we need, and so you deserve those words. And then there was this like awkward silence, right? Because now, what do you say to each other? And I'm feeling like a little bit dishonest. So I look at him and I go, you know I'm not voting for you, right? And he burst out laughing and he goes, Chris, of all the things I'm worried about right now, that was not one of them. I know you're not voting for me. And I said, good, Mr. President, because I didn't want to mislead you with the kind words, like I am not voting for you. And we spoke in the time between then and 2 days after the election, we spoke every day, sometimes twice a day. He'd call me from Air Force One. Now look, he's a politician too, and he's cute. So like one day he calls me from Air Force One near the end of the week, and he says, Chris, you know I'm in the middle of this re-election thing. I'm like, I'm aware, Mr. President. And he said, and you know, it's a tough race. I said, uh-huh. And he said, and when a tough thing needs to be done, you always get a guy from Jersey right near you. And he said, I have a guy from Jersey with me, and he wanted to say hello. And I said, okay. So he hands the phone over, and I hear the voice of Bruce Springsteen. Now, this is completely dirty pool to do to a guy from New Jersey of my age, because you're like, oh my God, it's Bruce, right? And so Bruce is on the phone complimenting me. What a great job I'm doing. Thanks, it's really great, Sarah, great. He gives the phone back to the president, and he goes, President says to me, anything else? And I said, very dirty pool, Mr. President, very dirty pool. So we had a lot of conversations over that period of time. Most of them were really substantive. A few of them were entertaining, like that one. But we treated each other like real people and who had a job to do. My most important responsibility was getting my state on the road to rebuilding and recovering as quickly as I could. And his job was to help me achieve that goal. And we did it. And, you know, I've gotten criticized by any number of Republicans. You heard Vivek Ramaswamy, you know, on the debate stage say, why don't you go and hug Obama again? I mean, now, you know, Vivek was, you know, what, like 15 or something back then? I'm surprised he even remembered what went on. But, you know, I have no regrets. And I would do it exactly the same way. Because my job, the oath I took, was to serve the people of my state. I took an oath of office, not an oath of party. And my job was to do my job. And that's what I did. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know and all the crap I've taken from certain people in my party, I'd do the exact same thing because it's the right thing to do. Yes. Right? Are you raising your hand? No, you're good. Go ahead. So they're going to bring you a microphone.
Hello, thank
Hi.
you. My question pertains to our children and our next generation. Your son and my daughter both just graduated from Providence College. Go Friars.
Go Friars. Big
And
win last night over Marquette.
Huge win.
Very big
Huge
win.
win.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So with regard to them, I have my daughter who just graduated. I have a son who's currently a junior at Tulane. And, you know, in conversations with them and their children and their friends, that generation is very discouraged. They don't remember the Tip O'Neill bipartisan years that we all remember. All they know is that the polarization in this country is at an all-time high. They don't see an end in sight. They're worried about paying off college debt. They think they'll never be able to afford a home. They are concerned about earnings not keeping up with lifestyle. So what is your message to them? And if elected to the White House, what would you do to help that generation?
Well, look, my message to them would be to tell them that I felt exactly like they do right now when I was their age or even a little younger. Because as I said in the open, like at 18 years old, I went to the University of Delaware. My dad had lost his job. I was borrowing most of the money that it took to be able to even be there. I had some scholarships and I had loans. And I saw no hope in sight. And I feel like if you talk to my generation back then, they would sound a lot like the generation of our 23-year-old and 20 or 21-year-old children, right? And first thing I'd say to them is, you live in the greatest country in the world. And so the first thing you need to do is to have faith in the fact that you're better being here than you are being anyplace else in the world. There's going to be more opportunity than there is anyplace else. You can't see it right now, and I understand why you can't, but there is. Second, hopefully we give them a president who tells them that and takes actions to be able to help make their lives better by lowering the amount of deficit spending and debt in the country so that interest rates go down and inflation goes down. So they're not as worried about what they're going to have to pay back or whether they're going to be able to afford to borrow to buy a home because interest rates are too high. You tell them about their student loans. Look, we're going to do the best we can by cracking down on colleges to lower those costs for the people who are about to come. And what I would do, I would tell you, is if tuition goes up more than the rate of inflation, we pull their federal funding from every college because it's ridiculous. I'll give you an example. Our daughter, who's older than our son who just graduated with yours from Providence, went to Notre Dame, graduated in 2018. Her last annual tuition was $62,000 a year. Our daughter now, our youngest, is a junior at Notre Dame. Her tuition this year is $81,000 a year. It's gone up $19,000 in less than 5 years. It's ridiculous. And we should say to these colleges who gather enormous endowments that I don't know what they use them for and continue to raise tuition at this rate, no more. I would say, here's the deal. You raise total cost, not just tuition, because then they play games with the other stuff. Total cost, more than the rate of inflation in that year, we withdraw all federal funding, including no student loans to your students. Because then students are going to go, oh, can't stay here. I'm going someplace else where they don't raise the tuition that high. We need to impose restrictions on these colleges and universities. They've gotten completely out of control because there's limitless money. Because they say, oh, good, we raised it $19,000 in 5 years. No problem. Just borrow more. And they leave these kids in enormous debt, which makes them despondent coming out. Now, Mary Pat and I came out of school with big debt because then I went on to law school and borrowed the money to go there. So it took us 10 years to pay our loans back. And we didn't buy a house for those 10 years because we had to pay those loans back. But by that time, we were in the late 80s, early 90s. We felt pretty good about the fact that that investment turned out to be a good investment. That's the other thing you have to do, is have, as the economy grows, it gives them hope because they're going to be able to get jobs that pay more and that give them an opportunity to live their lives that way. The hope a president can provide is both material by doing things that will keep costs down and inspirational by reminding them of the things they don't know and giving them a vision for where we're headed. And that's one of my biggest problems with this race is it's all about yesterday. The Democrats are about what we didn't do. Trump's about what was done to him. Everybody's looking backwards. And that also is depressing. You know, I remember when I was trying to decide whether to run for governor or not, I had a good friend of mine who was in his late 60s and was U.S. attorney with me. He was in Utah, I was in New Jersey. And he said, hey, I hear you're thinking about running for governor. And I told him all the reasons why I shouldn't. You know, it's a Democrat state. There's a million more Democrats than Republicans. The guy I'm running against was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. He's going to outspend me by a fortune. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Chris? He goes, I'm an old guy now, and much more of my life is in the rearview mirror than through the windshield. And when I look at that life, he said, the only things I truly regret are not the things I tried at and failed. It's the stuff that I was too afraid to ever try. And now I'm too old to ever try it again. And that's the kind of inspiration we need to give to kids. It's like, I understand that there's some fear and trepidation. If you didn't have some, you'd be stupid. But all of us have been able to get it done. And your family have given you a leg up by helping you get to a college education and get to some place where you need to go, give you the tools you need to be able to make the most of your life. And the last thing I'd say, and I say it to my kids, and now I'll say it to yours, is that there's only two things in life you can really control. The rest of life is a roller coaster ride. It's how hard you work and how you treat other people. That's it. The rest of it, you know? And if they do it the right way, if they work really hard and they treat other people well, they're going to be okay. And that would be my message to them. It's that every generation who's done that's done just fine here. And if you ignore the negativity and the anger and the bitterness and the vitriol, and you say, I'm going to work as hard as I can, and I'm going to treat other people with respect and kindness, you're going to rise to the top. I believe that. Sir, with the UNH sweatshirt, you're the second to last question.
Yes, Governor. My name is Bob Beckett, and I live in the area. I actually met you and Mary Pat 8 years ago in Hollis, New Hampshire. So welcome
Good to see
back.
you again. Thank you.
My question has more of an international flair to it. As we have our squabbles here in the U.S., budgetary and political and all these things, there are others around the world that are taking advantage of that. And I'm fortunate enough that I have a job with, I spend a lot of time outside of the U.S. And what I've seen China do with its Belt and Road Initiative is honestly very, very scary. The influence that they're buying, the positioning that they're getting for raw materials that are going to be so important in the next generation economy is staggering. So while we're doing all of our infighting, others around the world are taking advantage of it. And I honestly don't think that there's enough attention in Washington on this, because I think from a strategic perspective, it's probably one of the most critical things that goes unspoken about. So I'd just like to hear what your thoughts and comments are on that.
Yeah, look, I think you read it predominantly correctly, that we've been asleep at the switch. And I think it initially started after 9/11, when rightfully we had our focus on trying to prevent another terrorist attack and focus on retaliating against the people who did that to our country. And it gave us a very, very myopic focus. Remember what President Bush said at the time, you know, whether you perform the terrorism yourself or you harbor a terrorist, you're an enemy of the United States. Well, that gave us a very, very narrow focus. And we needed to have that narrow focus for a while, but it extended for probably longer than it should have. And then President Obama was not interested in engaging the world in that way. And President Trump is clearly not willing to engage the world in any way. And President Biden is running around starting and putting out fires all over the place. And so we've had a period now, you could argue, for nearly 20 years, where we haven't been doing the kind of engagement with the world that we should. And China has taken advantage of that. And everything you just said is correct. They have done this Belt and Road Initiative. They have garnered great influence with a number of African countries where a lot of the precious materials that we need to develop some of the new age technology that we are using now and want to continue to expand on they're going to have a lot of control of those materials. What do we do? Here's the other side of that coin, which I think is going to provide us with an advantage if we have the right president over the next number of years. All of that spending they did is now catching up to them for a few reasons. They have debt in that country that is breathtaking. They have built entire cities in places where no one lives. On spec, they built apartment buildings, office buildings, and you go there and literally there's no one there. And they have all that debt now and no activity from either domestic or foreign companies to support it. They had for decades a one-child policy. And so now what's happening is they don't have a next generation of young people to come up and support that economy. So they have an incredibly aging economy that's no longer producing at the efficient level that they were 20 years ago. And so it's making their economy come down significantly. At the same time, because they want to compete with us militarily, they've been building up their military at an enormous rate, faster than we did at any other time other than World War II. That's very expensive as well. So we have a moment here where they're in some trouble too. President Xi didn't come to San Francisco because he wanted to see the Golden Gate Bridge, okay? He came to San Francisco because he wanted to be with all those American business people and have them continue to invest in him. Because if they don't, he's in big, big trouble. So, correct, right? So now, what do we do in response to that? This is when a president who knows how to bring the country together goes to our business community and says, all right, we've helped to build this Chinese economy over the last 50 years since Nixon opened the door there. It's now time for us to get something in return. And we need for you to work with us to put a bit of a vice on the Chinese economy, to tighten it a little bit, to make sure that they understand that your investment is discretionary, unlike in their country where investment is mandatory. And that is the advantage we can take at this moment because of the crisis that is developing for them. And that's leveraging they don't have a private sector to speak of. We need to leverage our private sector against them. And it's not about pulling things out of China. I'm not going to advocate for them to take anything out of China necessarily. It's just not to give any more because they've gotten used to eating at a rate in China of capital that they need our capital to help satiate that appetite. And if we pull back, we're going to get their attention really quickly. And a guy who is a dictator, and remember something, Trump was up here last weekend. He said, Xi is a great leader because he controls 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. Like, that's something that the American president should be saying admiringly. Like, I'm sorry to keep going back to that stuff, but every time I go into a different part of the world and I think about what he was talking about in this state last weekend, it's just breathtaking that he's saying that stuff. What I would say to President Xi is, you know, you've had a lot of advantage for a long time, but me and our private sector, we need more from you now before you get any more from us. And we need to craft agreements on those precious metals and other items in Africa. We need to fashion agreements regarding the stealing of intellectual property that they do from us every day of the week. You want us to continue to invest in your country? We're willing to consider it. But in return, you have to play with us in a different way than you've been playing with us for the last 20 years. And I think you need a president who will be taken seriously, who will take the time to study and learn every nuance of it that needs to be learned so that when he sits across from a guy like Xi, it's a negotiation that can go in our favor. And we need somebody who's not going to allow having his rear end kissed by some dictator to turn his head and make him give things away. Remember, Trump made a trade deal where he said it was the greatest trade deal of all time with China. They have complied. Let's just take the agriculture part for a second. They've bought a third of what they promised to buy already by this time. A third. And they're paying no penalty for that. That's the great trade deal that Donald Trump negotiated. So that's the way I would deal with China. And I appreciate the question. And I could take one more before I let you go home. You already had one, so I'm going to go to you.
Just a quick one. Trump cut off funding for the WHO. Biden reinstituted it. Which way do you go?
I do not want to continue to give money to a World Health Organization that is going to be dominated by China. And what we learned during COVID was we couldn't get information out of the World Health Organization because it was bad news for China, right? Because what it was going to show was that COVID started in a lab in China that was funded in part by the World Health Organization. So it was both in the World Health Organization's, interest and in China's interest for us not to get that information anytime quickly. And so I have no interest in investing in an organization that is going to be dominated by one member. And even if it was just dominated by us, it's not right. It's supposed to be to prevent what happened in 2020 and 2021. In fact, it made matters worse, not better. So I pay people based on performance, and their performance stinks. And so I got other things I have to pay for, and that wouldn't be one that I'd be looking to pay for anytime soon. So I am... Thank you. I'm gonna get ready to let you all go and begin to celebrate Christmas. Let me end by saying this to all of you. I started off this meeting really seriously because I really thought on the way over here that it's my obligation to deliver that serious message to all of you. You care enough to show up here on a Wednesday night, a few days before Christmas, when I'm sure there's other stuff you could be doing. That tells me you're serious people who care about your state and care about your country. And you deserve better than slogans. You deserve better than sweet talk. You deserve better than evasive answers to direct questions. But the only way you're going to get it is if you demand it. Because politicians are taught to not give difficult answers to difficult questions, to evade if you can, to distract if you can, do whatever you can to not answer them directly. My problem is I'm from New Jersey. And you get your rear end kicked like on a daily basis, like on the schoolyard if you try to do that, let alone when you get into politics in the first and fourth largest media markets in this country. There is a training you get when you're there that lets you know that you can get away with it for a little while, but not for long. You shouldn't allow anybody to get away with it here. And you should demand answers to your questions. And I hope that what I did tonight was answer your questions and answer them directly and answer them from the heart. Because in the end, I know this from Sandy. When I got that briefing about all the things that were horrible that had happened, after they're done giving you all of the facts and the information, you're sitting around a table with probably a dozen cabinet members, they all get quiet and they just stare at you. That's when you know you're governor. And I suspect the same thing happens when you're president. They tell you all the problems, all of the issues, all of the hard stuff, and then they look at you and go, well, you asked for it, so what are we going to do? Think about who you want to be sitting at the head of that table. Think about who you think knows these things well enough, has had enough experience, and who has the right heart to make these decisions in the right way. And only you can decide that. I don't get to vote here. Only you do. And you're going to make that call. But I will tell you that every minute I spend here gives me greater hope for our country and greater hope for our democracy because people like you show up. You're not sitting at home staring at the TV and complaining, which you could be, but you're here. And you want to try to find answers to the questions and the concerns and the parental worries that we all have. And that's what I'm trying to provide. And in the end, the greatest honor I've ever had in my life was to serve as governor of the state where I was born and raised. And now to twice have had the opportunity to run for president of the United States. My mom is gone now for 20 years. But she wouldn't have believed it. She was the daughter of a single mother, raised in abject poverty, having to raise her younger sister and younger brother because my grandmother was out working 14, 15 hours a day. And the idea that one generation removed from that that her son has gotten the opportunity not once but twice to run for president of the United States would be, in one sense, completely breathtaking to her if she were here to see it. Unfortunately, she never saw me be governor, and she didn't see me get to do this, at least not with me. Although I suspect she's been watching a lot of it. And maybe it's been a gift because she had a lot of opinions. And I would have been hearing all of them, I can guarantee you. But one of the great things that my mother said to me, which I've tried to use to guide my life, and certainly to guide my political life, is she used to say to us two things, say to me in particular, two things all the time. One was, she'd say to me, Chris, you have everything you need to achieve anything you want in life if you're willing to work hard enough for it. And she'd say that over and over and over again to remind me the responsibility is on me. I've been given everything I need to succeed. Now it's on me. And the second thing she would say to me is, Christopher, because if you had named your kid Chris Christie, you would call him Christopher too. She wanted to deny that she had any complicity in that naming. She'd say, Christopher, be yourself, because then tomorrow you don't have to try to remember who you pretended to be yesterday. And my entire political life's been guided by that advice. And I do it because it's the right thing to do, but I do it too as kind of a tribute to her. And I used to say all the time 8 years ago when I'd talk about her that in our family, in the automobile of life, my dad's a wonderful guy. He's watching tonight. He's 90 years old. He's totally with it and active and driving and, gosh, dating a 74-year-old woman gives hope to everybody, doesn't it? You know, in the automobile of life, though, growing up, he was the passenger and my mother was the driver. She was judge, jury, and executioner. She loved the last part the most. And she was the person who set the tone and set the rules. And I know that if she were here now, she would be telling me to do this. She would be saying to me, God gave you that mouth. Use it for something good. And so part of all this is a tribute to her. Is I know that she believed I was given all these gifts and that she wanted to make sure I used them and used them for something more than just making money for myself, but to do something for the country that gave her father the opportunity to become an American citizen at Ellis Island 4 days after he was born on a boat on the way over here. And her father, my grandfather, became a citizen that way, and his grandson could be president of the United States. There is no other country in the world where that can happen. And so when our kids say, woe is me, and they have some basis for it, I remind my kids of that every day. Only here could this happen. No other place in the world could it ever happen. And so we don't have any excuses. We just have challenges. And we have to decide, do we meet the challenge or don't we? And we not only need to demand that of ourselves, we need to demand that of every person who comes in front of you and asks for your vote. And if they don't give it to you, you don't give it to them. And so we're going to keep working as hard as we can to make this country richer, freer, stronger, and more filled with opportunity than it was when we got here. I'm not going to be a part of the first generation who gives that away voluntarily, and I hope you won't either. So thanks, and Merry Christmas to everybody.